All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Dellinger. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast, and with me is Hannah Taylor. So, welcome, Hannah.
Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for having me here. So
Yeah.
wonderful.
So, Hannah, you teach something called Village Principles. And of course, I'm going to ask you to talk more about that. But don't usually do this on the podcast, but I'm just going to say to anyone listening that I totally endorse this. This message is approved by Seth. Village Principles is an amazing practice, which I would describe as kind of a missing link from a lot of different practices that are out there around relationship.
Mm.
So I myself have a background with circling, authentic relating, that kind of thing. But what I find that you're offering really gets to those kind of not so easy to figure out situations. And the village principles, there's only three of them. So there's a simplicity to what you do. But then on the Zoom calls that you offer, and we can give listeners information how to find that, we're we're always you're inviting, through simple prompts and things, we're getting into different situations and then looking at different nuances, which have been super helpful to me in my own life, but also in the teaching I do of different embodied practices. So Hannah, again, just sort of speaking to listeners, you offer the village principles. You also have particular programs both for men and for women. I know I haven't yet experienced it yet, but you have a course called Abundantly Boundaried. So boundaries is something that you've specialized with a lot. Um, but I thought it would be fun. You put out a post today, which, as you're often talking about, you're talking about village principles, but it was a really, the way you described it was a little different than I've ever seen. So I wanted to read you this little quote that you wrote, but then it might be a strange starting point. I don't know, but then you can say more, because you're also on Substack and putting out posts every day. And
5 days a week. Yeah.
yeah, you have a so that's good. You're filling the space, because now I can't find the thing that I want to read. Okay, you know what I'm gonna do? I'll just get back to it later. Why don't you tell us without the quote? What's Village Principles?
Well, I love that you called it a missing link because my alliterative way of saying it is it's timeless technology of relationship, really. And these are like the ways of having relationship that you can apply to any way you believe relationships should be. So if I believe relationships should be a certain way, the village principles are going to help me. And if you believe relationships should be a totally other way, the village principles is going to help you. Because the village principles are about how we hold our value system, how we advertise our value system, how we live in alignment with our value system, and how we attract people who want to live that way and people who agree with us about how this goes. And so it's this timeless technology of relationship, which we can see throughout all cultures. And we can see that there's so much cultural variation, but there are still laws of relationship, like there's physical laws. And so that's what I'm teaching. And you know about the book, The Timeless Way of Building. So the way that that is the way of architecture without being a style. It's like the way of building. It's the pattern language of building, which never imposes or indicates or implies any style whatsoever. It could be built in any style whatsoever. And that's what I'm doing with relationships. It's not a stylistic matter, and we love to play with style, we'll just go in on any different scenario, but it's always important to me to say on the calls and to really be in the beingness of this, that this is creative exploration. This is not do this thing. You should try this. It's always just like what comes up for you when you think about doing it this way. And then that's how we get to those underneath parts. It's like And it's how we bury those underneath parts if we want to use personal development to bury the underneath parts. It's like, oh, I know what to do. And so I'm just going to make myself do that thing. And then I don't have to think about why I don't want to do that. That's just my avoidance. Right. So,
So I got over my embarrassment and I found the little quotation. Um, so just to go a little further into village principles, and then I'm really also curious about like the backstory, because I know you have a pretty, there's just you've been in places like, so if people are looking at you and saying, wow, she looks really nice and happy and stuff, like I agree, but you've been through some really hard stuff, and I just imagine that the village principles are very much the product of your experience, as well as you mentioned already the timeless way of building. That's Christopher Alexander. There's some other thinkers that you've introduced me to, or that we already were both interested in before, which I want to talk about. But I wanted to get to that background too. But you have this, so your post that you just put out, it was called Diversions. And the opening line is, one of my favorite things in this world is the creative power of humans to flout tyranny and control. And you talk about, there was this guy who, there was some, he's like a farmer, he has horses, they wouldn't let him build a shade structure for some, like, I don't know, bureaucratic reason. So he built this huge, like, chairs and tables, like as a sculpture, but they were big enough that the horses could go underneath them. So that was an example. But later on in the same post, you're describing village principles. And so I want to find, yeah, so you say the village principles do not obey or resist tyranny, but they show us the way to free ourselves and those in our stewardship from systems of control, whether those systems are present or not. And I'll just add the next paragraph to, the village principles are principles of relationship which garner the opt-in of everyone who is right here, right now, empowering us to transcend external control forces while retaining the most important resource of all, relationship. That's what I wanted to start with, but I couldn't find it.
mm-hmm. Oof. Yeah, big stuff. Well, I want to I want to say that like I am speaking actually from the perspective of the former tyrant.
Hmm.
So in terms of like the hard things that I went through, my father died when I was 5, suddenly. And then his brother moved in on my mother I mean, he's just like a very damaged individual. And he brought a lot of emotional abuse into our home and a lot of tyranny into our home. And that like created within me the tyrant that was a tyrant to myself, a tyrant to my siblings, and just like a rage monster overall. And that was real steady until I was 23. And when I was 23, I started waking up. Well, I was 22 when I started to read The Secret, and get into certain like ways of seeing my own thoughts and seeing my own processes and seeing what I was taught. And then my mother dropped dead right before I turned 23. That was sudden. We had no idea what happened. She just like died in her kitchen with my siblings there freaking out. Like it was just like such a nightmare scenario. My sister's 18, my brother's 16, I'm 23. And it was just like, it was like a total obliteration of my life. And I had just discovered that tool, The Secret. So it was like this, like, it was like a preventative measure from me becoming one of those people who's in the like, you can just be happy all the time. Because I was not going to be happy all the time. Just certainly not. And this information had rung true with me, and I was listening to it over and over again because it is the truth.
So I don't actually know what The Secret is, although that rings a bell, like I've heard it talked about, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
have no idea what this is.
Yeah, it's by Rhonda Byrne and it's all about the law of attraction. And it's it's about uh it's just like intro to the law of attraction, right? And so there's a lot of shade that gets thrown on this book because it is that pop psychology. Just use the universe as a catalog, get whatever you want, like be consumer materialistic, right?
Mm.
But the thing about the law of attraction is that if you are really doing it, you can't use it that way. If you're really doing it, manifestation is actually how things become real.
Mhm.
And so if you take those teachings and you're trying to simply think thoughts, they aren't going to work for you. And then you're going to throw the teachings away. And so if you honor the teachings in such a way that they produce for you, that practice will reveal the things that are not in that book. And that's what happened for me. It's
Mm.
like, because I had this book being like shiny, happy, and then I had like, your mother's dead, and so is your dad, and you're 23. Also, you should get a divorce. Like, it was like a whole full-on life erasure
Mhm.
for me. And then after just at about the end of the year that my mother had died, I started working in a juvenile correctional facility in Vermont, which is no longer there. And I actually worked with children that my mother had had in elementary school because she worked in a behavioral school as a counselor. So it was really like actually carrying on her legacy, actually carrying on her work. And that's like another fractal in which, I had relieved my personal tyranny. I had basically gone rage sober. Like I held a brand new standard for myself and my behavior toward my loved ones, and I was ruthless with it. And they kept expecting the old Hannah to be there. And I kept having to stay the course, even in light of their expectation, even in light of their treatment of me as if I was still the tyrant in my personal life. So it's like I handle the tyranny of being the tyrant in my personal life, and then I go and like take up the position of the tyrant in a prison, right? So I'm like the prison guard, literally imprisoning children. And so that power imbalance, and then the fact that it's children, and then the fact that you're stuck with them. Like we were living there in the building with them for at least 2 days, at least 2 nights, sometimes 3 nights. And it puts you in this relational position where you have to win every single fight, every single argument. They get nothing of what they want. And then you have to have a relationship which is constantly improving. So it's like odds stacked fully against any relationship. And then how do you create relationship in that? So I would say that the village principles, they're certainly grounded in my experiences of my parents' like sudden death. Because I'm like, hey y'all, moments are countable. We actually do not know how many we have with our loved ones. But then the village principles really came out of like, what are the irrefutable practices of relationship? What are the things that work when nothing at all should work?
Mhm.
When the odds are completely stacked against us, what could, you know, create relationship? And that's what these village principles are. And you can also find the tactics, the communication tactics are in the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And I can't recommend that book enough. It's so incredible.
Right.
I've listened to it and listened to it and listened to it.
So, I mean, listeners are probably like, well, so what are the village principles? And I do want to give you a chance to talk about them specifically, but there's a couple things that, some of what you shared I've heard before, and there was already some new details that are really interesting to me. But first of all, part of how I found you was I was in a situation with a relationship that seemed really difficult, and I didn't really know you yet, but on Facebook you had posted something about that book that you just mentioned, Never Split the Difference. And this book is written by a guy who is the lead FBI hostage negotiator. So he's not he's also dealing with people who like have someone that they're going to kill if, and yet he's trying to get the hostages out alive. And how do you have a relationship with someone taking hostages? And you said in the thing I read, you said, well, I used to work in this juvenile um, facility, and this is the book, that showed me how to do it. And I think there's many other steps along the road, but one of the things that I remember I said to you on one of the calls about the village principles is like, hey, Hannah, these seem easy enough to remember, but if they're not in my body, like if I don't just do these things spontaneously, like and so like anything, there's a practice. I know that I also told you the last time we spoke about a situation I was in where I didn't know what to do, but then I sort of thought of something related to one of the principles, and then that kind of just got my attention looking at something. Then I saw something new in the situation and opened up. But there's this whole thing between, I kind of have some, I read a book, I read The Secret, or I read, some other book, I read Chris Voss's book, but now I'm trying to put it into action. So one of the things you told me once, and what you just said, like you were a rage monster, and yet you decided I'm not going to be the Hannah that they're used to seeing, and my family didn't. So there's something that you figured out about not acting that way anymore. But then there's just like, it sounds like you went like cold turkey. And so I'm just wondering what that was like internally. Like, I'm going to change my behavior now. And like, that's so easy to say and not so easy to do. So I'm just wanted to like hear a little more about that.
Oh, yeah. Um, Gosh, there's so many factors that go into that. There's so many factors. I think I think waking up to certain truths stole my righteousness away. So I could no longer be righteous about how I was acting before. And it's like, oh my God, that's just true. I just have to eat crow. And I just have to understand that I've been doing it all wrong.
Mm.
And then I have to understand that I was taught to do it all wrong.
Mm.
I was taught this way, and my whole family is aligned with this way that, like, when someone's pissing you off, you're yelling at them, and when someone's yelling at you, you're ready to forgive them. And that's just what family is. Family is the people you yell at who can never not forgive you for that. Or, yeah, there's that, but there's also, I was just swept away by grief and love. I think, it's hard to wake up on a Tuesday in the same old life you've been living and decide you're going to be a different person. There's some element of privilege in having my life erased and having my mother drop dead. There is a privilege there to become a totally different person because of that event. And this is why New Year's is compelling. This is why the psychedelic journey is compelling. It's like it gives us a point to say, from this point forward, everything changed.
Right.
And so I really respect people who give themselves those points. And there are people who are like, oh gosh, you must have done a lot of psychedelics. And I'm like, actually, no, really. Life is what handed me all of this. And I handled what life handed me really without drugs or medicine of any kind at that time. Not that I'm against or whatever. It's just like, well, that was all happening. Medicine was not a part of my life. So, but I think that like a medicine journey or can sometimes be that type of post in the ground that lets people shift their whole life. But for me, it is this inner game. It's this inside feeling of like, and this is the thing that I say, like, I'm not trying to take rage out of the world so that no one's hurt by rage anymore. I want to help the people who are feeling rageful all the time. It is hell. It's actual hell. And there's no solution for it. And all it does, sure, it hurts other people, but it's evidence that I'm hurting every minute of every day. And my attention is consumed by all of what I don't want.
Right. Well, I understand why you used the word privilege, even though obviously it was devastating when you went through. But it's like you just got a new script all at once. And the reason, aside from just, a personal interest in your story, that I want to ask is I think a lot of people these days are kind of looking at the whole script out here and saying, this isn't working. But like day to day, momentum makes it hard to just wake up and be another person. But just, in terms of like, I don't know, it would sound like a cliche if I try to summarize the world today, but everyone's overwhelmed, everyone's dealing with all these things, and the people who are coming to the sessions that you lead may not be dealing with, might not have had the same kind of dramatic experience like you, but I feel like they're trying to rewrite scripts, and so maybe it's a more gradual process there. But and I will also say this was part of another thing that, so I sort of was reading things you were writing, but when I learned about what happened to you as a young person, and then I think that's kind of my sense is like, okay, whatever I hear Hannah saying, like that's what she's been through and she's saying it. Like I listened in a different way.
Mm.
And another thing, it sounds like from what you've said so far, the experience in the juvenile facility had aspects that eventually you wanted to get away from. But one of the things that you've mentioned a few times, which really resonated, is you said something like, I know what it's like to meditate while someone's banging on the door. Right. And that seems like a pretty good metaphor for what a lot of us are dealing with these days. I mean, a lot of people meditate every morning, but life is kind of just like banging. And so whether or not we do more of the backstory, I'm just really curious about that. Like, how does one meditate while, there's this huge ongoing violent disturbance that is right in your face?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, that a conversation for me that's really about fear of the threat
Mm.
versus fear of the consequence. And and I started this as a teenager actually, because if I'm going to get on the roller coaster, I don't believe truly that there's going to be a consequence. So do I need to react in fear, or could I relax my whole body and see what this roller coaster feels like to a totally relaxed body? So there's something in it where I witnessed a practice of trust and then a delusion of mistrust and fear, right? So, when we're talking about someone pounding on a steel door and I'm like on the other side of the steel door, like what we have is noise. That's what's happening. Noise. Like, and I could be afraid of the threat, and the noise registers as a threat to my deeper body. But I assure myself that the consequence in this case does not exist. This is a door that's going to hold. It's locked. I'm here to witness that this child is safe and that this child has someone there that's witnessing them, right? And then it's like, how will I feel during this experience? Because sometimes you're there for hours
Mhm.
and dysregulation can go on. And it's like, will I also be dysregulated? Would I want that for me for 4 hours? So that's one of the things that I was controlled as a child with fear of the threat, yelling and like lunging toward me, like, posturing, that type of thing. My whole family does the in the car, afraid of the threat, afraid of the threat, afraid of the threat. Like there's so many ways that we cultivate fear of a threat that if we just gently question what is the consequence here, we can be like, oh, okay, actually, I would choose a an experience of trust to match my practical trust. And I do this meditation in the car. I'm like how this person is driving. It's like they're like going around and I'm like talking to myself and I'm like, they drive their car all the time. I am not driving the car. I am surrendered already to however they drive this car. Now, will I make this a car ride where I criticize their driving and feel terrible the whole time? Or will I just run and leap into death's arms and say, you know what? You're going to take me someday. I might as well relax and enjoy the music and just opt in on my own practice of trust.
Right. Right. Yeah. Leap into death's arms. That's Hannah Taylor humor as I know it. That's great.
Dark around here, y'all.
Okay, I have one more backstory question because I'm mindful I want to sort of get into the heart of it, but hopefully, for people listening, this is beginning to get just a sense of where we're going. Because another thing I would say that my experience with you is you strike me as incredibly skillful, and you write about, I quoted your post, but often what you're writing about is your experience. And another thing that you say is, and you can elaborate or correct this, but you've said things more or less along the lines of, I don't experience friction in my personal life, because you've curated your personal life to be that way. And I think a lot of people would like to be able to do that, but they don't know how. So there's a lot of skill here. And I think knowing what you've been through helps to understand that. But someone else that I learned about from you, and I imagine as part of your own backstory, so I'd love to hear your story, is the work of Byron Katie.
Mm. Love it. Love it.
How did that get started for you?
Well, I found that and Never Split the Difference actually either during or after working in corrections. So I was either in the middle of that or through it when I found those works.
Mhm.
I can't really quite remember. I'm pretty sure I was through it when I learned of Never Split the Difference. But the work of Byron Katie is simply CBT. It's cognitive behavioral therapy where we're examining our thoughts. And it's a lot like The Secret, where we're examining our thoughts. What is the experience that I am delivering myself? And then there's this spiritual element in Byron Katie's work where we start to wake up to reality. We really wake up to the here and now. And anytime we're in touch with reality, really the here and now, that's an enlightened state. That's everything there is.
Mm.
If I can be awake to that, incredible. And then if I see how my mind works to destroy my connection with here and now, I kind of get eager to be in on that game and say, like what can I have now? And there's kind of like this the Zen way of understanding needs, which I talked about on a call this week, I think, is if I if I need something, I die if I don't have it. If I truly need it, I die from not having it. And dead people don't have needs, so that takes care of itself there. So the idea that there's ongoing need is a lie.
Mm.
There's no need in any moment that I'm breathing. And if I die for lack of food, well, a dead person doesn't have needs either. So that's kind of the ballast end on the teeter-totter on the seesaw. We have like there's nothing at all that I can truly claim that I need if I'm breathing and able to speak. And then on the other side is the secret, which is like the universe is a catalog. It is offering you infinity at all times. And so Byron Katie, I think, is that middle space where it's like that's what introduced that infinite here and now to me.
Mhm.
And that relaxation of coming to one of my favorite things she says is, I'm either sitting somewhere, standing somewhere, or lying on the ground. Like, or lying down, I think she says. I guess we could lay in a bed.
Good. Yeah.
So I'm either sitting somewhere, standing somewhere, or lying down. The facts of the situation are always something like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. It's sort of, she has this like razor sharp way of just cutting through narrative and like removing it And what's really, I mean, if you read her stuff, you also get this sense that like she seems like she was struck by lightning or something. I mean, she also was in a terrible, terrible place. She was in this halfway house, and then she sort of wakes up and says, I just realized that all my misery comes from my thinking, and I stopped believing my thinking. And, you know, it's also clear if you read her story, like she had that insight and then she kept working with that deliberately. But what's interesting is what she says that she's gotten to is she says things like, I don't make decisions anymore. I just watch myself to see what I'll do. And then she says, whatever happens, I love. And there's this way it's like, wait a minute, that just doesn't sound right. And yet, if you, I mean, if people never encountered her, maybe look her up on YouTube or get her book. But if you spend some time with her, you're like, oh, she's not bullshitting. Like this is really her experience. Um, so, but maybe we could to move the story forward. I mentioned, you know, the village principles grow out of kind of your personal life. So what is the thing that happened as you kind of took this on board and you started to clarify there are the three principles, and then you know you describe, I think, where you live or how you live today is that you live in a village. So what, yeah, let's maybe what is a village? Let's start with that.
Ah, oof. This comes right back to that privilege thing
Mm,
where I was privileged to be raised with not a lot of money. And so I've always had a village in that way. Be I have a Substack coming soon about the way that abundance of resources drives us apart. So my mom and my aunt raised us together. There wasn't daycare money, right? And there was hotel room money, but there wasn't hotel rooms money. And there was go visit family on vacation money, but there wasn't go to a resort money. So there's not only like an amount of resources, but there's a culture around that amount of resources that says independence and isolation are the best. The best thing we could do is have everyone have their own bedroom and bathroom. And all those poor people who have seven people sharing one bathroom will pour them. And in fact, the presence of a weighted blanket on the market is evidence that we were meant to have bodies on our bodies. Why would a weighted blanket feel so soothing to us if we weren't meant to have bodies on our bodies? And that to me is village eros. It's all these things that, whatever you want to call our culture, white, Western, capitalistic, consumeristic, you could call it any number of things, but where we are today uh, reviles the body
mhm,
and reviles bodily connection. There's so much about the way my life goes now that I couldn't describe. Like if I wrote about it, people would sexualize it or like be grossed out or like, but like just the simple intimacy that my friends don't shut the door when they pee. It's things like that, that animal acknowledgement
mhm.
and that living as animals in our bodies is part of village eros. And you know, when you grow up with a bunch of kids and outnumbered adults, stressed out and like trying to, make ends meet, like I'm the oldest sibling. Like those are my children. Like my siblings, my younger cousins, those are my children, and I'm raising children from that age. And then they have younger cousins and they're raising children from that age. And then I see, again, like the way that resources have driven people apart. And sometimes I say the problem with white culture is no one eats the baby. You got to eat the baby. You got to like in on the baby's belly, and if you didn't get eaten as a baby, what does that do to your nervous system? So there's something in being handled by incompetent other children as an infant and there's something in the chaos that puts us in our bodies. And sometimes I'll meet children, and the ones that have the chaotic house and they're raising each other, they're so in their bodies. And then there's like an intellectual intelligence of children who aren't raised that way. And then sometimes they're really disassociated from their bodies, even as children.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's just like a lot of like, why are the lines where they are? What makes me think I shouldn't be naked around my friends? Or what makes me think I shouldn't be naked?
Mhm.
What is that? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this really goes to, I think, what I was trying to express earlier when I said people are looking around and saying, hey, what we've got here just doesn't work. But then again, what we've got here is what we all were born into. So it's normal in that sense. Um, and you've talked on the calls, sometimes you refer to Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and what he talks about um, the five gates of grief, like the different kinds of grief that are, the phrase you use a lot is existential grief. Like, in other words, there will be grief in your life. But one of the things
The
that I,
grief of participating.
yeah, the grief of participating in a world where there's all kinds of suffering, and there's things that we expected that we didn't get is one of them. And that's the one that you've highlighted before, and you said, well, what you expected was a village. And when you say that, it's like, okay, I didn't grow up in a village, but yeah, when it feels right somehow in my body. Like when we talk about people do circling, and for the first time they feel seen and heard, and this is like, and why does it feel so good when someone listens to me and when I belong? And it's like, well, it's almost like it's so simple, like why, how, except that we don't experience that, but there's something in my body that's like, oh, I was heard out for just talking about what happens to be my experience and what interests me. And then it's like, wow, that doesn't happen. So anyway, that I feel like that's a really that's just an interesting piece. Like, we don't live in villages, and yet what I've gotten from being around you is like that would be the most natural thing. And yet it's so, there's a way that, like what you described, my friends leave the door open when they pee, like people walk around naked. People will say, wait, this sounds like counterculture, this sounds like
Yeah.
anarchy or something.
Yeah, or polyamory, or any number of, like, there's romantic and sexual associations on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or when it's really like you see dogs cuddling all the time and you don't like, oh, are those dogs gay? Like, doesn't even
Right, right.
like somehow it looks natural on dogs, and it does look natural on humans too. And oftentimes humans who have been alienated from these functions walk into those spaces where everyone is breaking every rule they've ever learned, and they somehow still feel like, oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Uh, the idea of like we don't live in a village, I want to say that we all do live in villages. There's at least a village inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
at the very least. The question is our village an interdependent one, or is it one subject to tyranny and control?
Yeah, and that was where we started, because I think that's what's in your post where you say how the village principles relates to tyranny, because there is tyranny in the world. I don't think we have to work hard to convince anyone of that. So how do I, and I think in the post you talk about both not sort of submitting to tyranny, but also not rebelling and trying to defeat tyranny. But there's sort of a third option here.
Yeah, there's this playful path and creative path. Um, what do I want to say about that? think it heals within. Well, it heals from all the directions at once, really. That, and this is the thing that Byron Katie woke me up to, is like, we can't control the world. It's actually hopeless. It's 100% guaranteed that we cannot control the world. So we can be in a controlling relationship with the world, and we might see fractions or fractals of what we want. But the tyrant is constantly disempowered and constantly disappointed. I was writing about command and how leadership rests on command, and command rests on an unwavering personal power, personal empowerment. Command comes from a person who's like, okay, I've so got me. Whatever happens, I've got me. And because I've got me, I have an idea about this situation. And then everyone looks around and looks and is like, oh, he's really got himself. Like maybe he's got a good idea for me or for us to all work on. So there's this way that command is an extension of personal power. And tyranny is the absence of personal power. It's harvesting power from the outside because it is in a state of constant disempowerment. So there's this ownership of personal power where personal power is something that someone can take from you, and nobody can give you.
Mm-hmm.
No one can give it back. No one can give it to you in the first place. It's something we each have to discover and claim and take back. But when we do, we have command rather than tyranny. And when we're trying to fight tyranny, we are the tyrant. And I said that in the post that you're referencing, like the tie goes to the dealer. So if there's a large control system and then I attempt to enact control, I'm dumping my energy into the ontology of control, and the dealer wins that tie. The larger control structure benefits from the energy I'm willing to contribute to a control system, or the energy that I pour into attempting to control a control system. But once we have that personal empowerment, we have command.
So one situation we've talked about a lot on other occasions is parenting. You already talked a little bit about your experience as a child. And I think one of the sort of double binds that happens, I'll just speak about the parent. It's like the child is up to something and the parent thinks this isn't going to lead to anything good. And so there's an intention to care for the child, but it becomes expressed as disallowing the behavior or scolding the behavior or punishing the behavior. And then it can even result in, uh-oh, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't done that. Now I have another level of complexity and problems between me and my child. And it all started with me worried that they were going to get in trouble or get hurt or something. And then suddenly I come in with my God-given parental powers and try to just use my authority rather than, but then this is the place where, especially let's just assume the parent is overworked, looking at the, constantly updating news feed on their phone, and like the world is like, it's like the banging on the door we were talking about. This is also going on. So how do we begin to disentangle this kind of situation? And if you want, we could, if you want to get into what are some of the village principles, because I'm sure people are wondering by now. But I wanted to give you a sort of a naughty situation because I find that that's actually what the discussions I've been in with you are often about. Like, okay, there's this tangled knot. What are we going to do in order to start to move towards something that feels a little bit more like that village that maybe we don't even know that we all want?
Whew. Well, yeah, I think like children are prone to be tyrants, right? Like we have child development evidence that like nobody else exists for a while for kids, right? So, and we all begin there. And possibly we could say that all tyranny is a result of someone who does not grow up. And again, like tyranny and control is something that someone who lacks personal power attempts to control the environment or other people in order to acquire power. And children are people who lack an understanding of their personal power. They don't know how the world works. They literally don't know anything we haven't taught them. They don't know anything we haven't taught them. And I am guilty of this myself. You know, I'm spending time with a 3-year-old and I'm like, that's not how markers work, right? Like, I am the one who has to teach her how markers work. No one has taught her. She's 3 years old. It's been 3 years and she's never interacted with a marker. But somehow I think she should know how it works. She has to learn, right? So just forgetting that we have to learn, that inspires us to control a child, which reinforces their understanding that they're not in power in the situation and inspires them to be a tyrant. And then we think we can control their control. And so this is a beautiful example of tyranny that's going unnoticed, right? It's like children trying to control and then parents trying to control back. What we need to understand as parents or stewards of children in any way, like I've been a step parent and then I worked in juvie, and so I do have parenting experience and I do have like child raising experience, and my friends have children. Children are very important to me. But what we have to understand is that when we have command, that's when the child can relax all their control and their tyranny. And that our command is meant to not be in power struggle over control with the child, because that's our own tyranny. And like, as we pile into the control structure, it's like we might be the dealer in this situation and the tie goes to us, but it doesn't feel good. And it's not teaching our children how to live. So the more that they need to claim control from the outside, the more they need to claim power, the more we give them power by trying to control them. And yeah. And the more we're really personally empowered, the more a child discovers their own personal empowerment.
Hmm. So the first village principle is I am the one.
It might be the only village principle.
Right. You said that. So I figured let's at least talk about the first one. But
So, so the 3 village principles we'll say are I am the one,
hmm,
opt in, and the point is love. I've said it as they are the point, or like the point is me being full of love the way that a hose is full of water by spraying it. Like, if I'm a hose, I'm only full of water when I'm gushing water. So I'm only full of love when I'm putting love onto the world. And so if I want to be full of love, what are my practices and tactics for putting love onto the world? Because it's a force.
mhm.
It's not a thing.
And what does it mean um, in this situation, in this situation, in this situation? But by calling it a principle and working with that way, it's like and I've had this experience a couple times that I've shared with you. I've been in these situations where I'm pretty sure in the past I would have just been frustrated or lose my temper or think woe is me and keep my mouth shut, but internally feel victimized or something. And then it's just like, wait, how can I opt into this situation? Like one of the questions is, what in this situation that might on the surface just suck for all kinds of reasons, well, what is the one thing in this situation that's for me? And actually, we're coming up on the holidays. We had a kind of a humorous discussion, like people, it's a cliche, but it's true. Like, what's the thing from forgetting who said this, but maybe you'll remember. It's the kind of hippie guru, but he's like, you think you're enlightened? Go spend 2 weeks with your family. So
Is that Thich Nhat Hanh?
no, it's not Thich Nhat Hanh. It's I know exactly who it is, and I'm blanking the name. Someone listening is going to put it in the comments, maybe, or I'll remember it in 10 minutes. But so let's say someone is like not looking forward to the holidays, and they have a lot of good reasons for that. They have past experience. How do they opt in to the holidays with the family?
Yeah, yeah, it's really complicated. So, well, let's back up and let's go to I am the one.
Mhm.
Because I am the one is where we handle our impulse to control.
Mhm.
The first corruption of principle number one is when I say it like you are the one. Never, ever, ever is this principle you are the one. This principle is I am the one. Always. I am the one. So I am the one. It also heals this enmeshment thing where something in how you feel is how I feel, right? That like I'm required to feel how you feel, or you feeling that way is a threat to how I feel. So what this does is it gives us the most sovereignty that's available. And I like to say that sovereignty and safety are both lies. They're experiences we can have, but they can never be facts. Right? So safety is not a fact. What are we safe from? Death, injury? No, we aren't. Like a meteorite could fall from the sky right now and crush me. It's very possible that I am not safe right now, but I'm experiencing safety, and that's the best it gets. And sovereign, I'm not sovereign. Your nervous system does, via mirror neurons, resonate with my nervous system. So I'm not sovereign, but I can have the experience that I'm sovereign. And I could say, your nervous system is making my nervous system be like this. Or I could say, the situation I have shown up for has my nervous system like this. What do I want to show up for? So I am the one, and I am the one having my experience, and I am the one choosing my experience. And because our childhood is mostly control systems, that breeds this oppositionality where I want to tell you what you're doing to me, and I want to tell you what I'm going to do to you. And I want to engage with the thing that's controlling me. When in fact, my boundaries are what I show up for and how I show up. And this really relates to the roller coaster and the car, where if I'm getting in the car, if I'm getting on the roller coaster, I am making an embodied commitment that I believe this is safe for me. And then I run this counter narrative where I'm terrified and this isn't safe for me and I don't want this, right? So that's happening when we go and visit our family. It's like I said yes to being in this space. And then I want to tell myself why I'm such a no to being in this space. So there's this thing that we get to have with I am the one, where opt-in is a consequence of I am the one. I am the one who decides whether I will visit my family at Thanksgiving or not. I am the one. And I am the one who walks into that situation, and I am the one who behaves however I behave in light of how the other person behaves. But yeah, this resonance of practice and story what I'm doing and then what I tell myself about what I'm doing is incredibly important for me being the one for me. So if I am going to show up for Thanksgiving, it's very damaging to me to run a narrative that that's going to be damaging.
Mhm. So it's like I get the invitation for the family holiday and I might say yes or no. But if I say yes, then I get to precisely calibrate what is the way that I'm walking in the door.
Yeah. And how do I opt in on whatever is going to be on the other side of that? How do I opt in? Because I am opting in. And I make that make sense with my story rather than arguing about how it doesn't make sense with myself. But this is how I can form an identity that, like, I do things that don't work for me. I engage in toxic patterns. Like, all of these things form identity pillars inside of us that continue to uphold patterns and structures that we all get to have, right? I can't say that they're bad, right? Like, and I never want to say that anybody's doing anything wrong or doing anything bad. There simply is a body full of dissonance about what I've done, and there's a body full of resonance, and I get to choose which body I have in any given moment.
Mhm. So opting in, an example is just chores. Oh, I have all these
Mhm.
chores I need to do. Um, damn it, that's not what I want to do right now, but these chores have to be done. So what does it mean to opt in a situation like that?
I mean, it starts before the assignation that these are chores.
Hmm.
It starts with understanding there are actions and rest. There is action and there is rest, and they are equal, and I am driven to both. And action is action, and rest is rest. And if I'm resting meditating, or I'm resting watching Netflix for 10 hours, if I'm resting consuming an entire fiction series, like, all of those are me sitting resting. And then if I'm driving for Uber or driving on a road trip, those are actions for action's sake. So action is action is action. What's the difference if I'm walking from room to room because I'm pacing, or if I'm carrying something that goes in the next room? I'm going to put it where it goes. So I'm simply taking action. So what gives us opt-in is the three P's of prosperity. And the three P's of prosperity are posture, pacing, and play. And the prerequisite to the three P's of prosperity is also a P. It's called presence. You might have heard of it. Oh, you're wonderful at presence. And there's presence Olympics, and I think you're going to win them this year.
Well, I have the presence mantra. That's what I do with my clients, um, which is probably I don't know if I told you about it. The presence mantra. I just invite people to again and again remember five words, which are breath, ground, space, sound, and light.
Mm.
Because we're always breathing. The ground is always under us. There's always surrounding space. There's always sound. There's always light. And we can, in a really, like, for me, and I think that I'm talking about what I do, but I'm also talking about why what you do feels so resonant with what I do is, like, another phrase I'll use is what we're after here is falling in love with life, right? If we can fall in love with life, then, as like you said, then we stop talking about chores. And then the flip side, and I mean, I had plenty of experience like cursing the chores that I have to do. So I know what that's like. And like you're saying, okay, you're walking from one room to the other, but now you're carrying something and you call it a chore. And it just strikes me in the moment where I say this is a chore and I have that narrative, I am doing that which I do not wish to do. It's like I fall out of love with life. I fall out of presence. And it's like I'm waiting to live again and that only happens after this quote unquote chore is done. So I've just, you know, disconnected. Yeah, from this thing you're saying before, from the infinity that's always on offer. I've just unplugged myself. So yeah, actually, you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about, and I'm sure it weaves into everything, but it's also maybe a piece of the backstory or whatever the current story. So prosperity is posture, pacing, and play. And the other thing I do with Feldenkrais is, some people would say it's all about posture. We pay a lot of attention to pacing, including going slower than people usually do. And then, yes, that the way I've heard you explain it is that opens up, I can be playful because I'm not going faster than I want to. I'm not, you know, I feel comfortable in my body. But and you've referred to the body already a lot, and at the same time, when we're on calls, we tend to be talking, and we tend to be going through, there are some practices, some meditations, so it's not that it feels very embodied, but I'm kind of curious about your experience. Like, what is the role of the body itself? And I know that you've I think practiced Alexander technique, which is
Not really. I've had it meant, I literally know one thing about the Alexander technique,
really
and it's relax upward.
relax
And
upward.
I'm
Well,
just, that's plenty. I could work with that my whole life. I don't want to
it's
know
a
more
good
from
thing.
Alexander. What if he's got more for me? Help. Like it's just,
I mean, he's got books and whatnot, and
yeah.
Feldenkrais
But
did
whatever he says, maybe I'll have a whole lifetime's
right,
work
right,
ahead of me. Just relax upward is enough. That's a whole lifetime's
right,
work.
right. Well, to bring it to something you said earlier, it's like you were talking about differentiating threat and consequences. Someone's banging on the door, but I'm pretty sure this door is going to hold. And yet, I can imagine a lot of people be standing in front of a door, and it's like, I don't know, maybe they know that this is a steel door, it's going to hold, but they can't stop from contracting. They can't, like, they might even know, I wish I could be relaxed,
Hmm.
but how do I do that? So I'm just wondering, working with
Bad news. It's a meditation. You just do it. And then you don't, and then you notice you're not, and then you do it. Yeah.
so that's beautiful. It's just practice. It's just practice.
It really is. It's really here and now. It's muscle tone. It's literally relax your muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you notice they're tight again, you relax them again. And then when you notice they're tight again, you relax them again. And what I like to say about meditation is that meditation is wander and return. The wander is part of the meditation. And we call that failure, and then we stop the meditation. We get out of it because we say wander is a state and it's outside of meditation. No, wander is part of meditation. We can't return without it. Right? So return, return to this here and now. And I love your presence or your presence things like breath, and I just wish they were all P's.
Yeah, I sometimes
Panting.
need to work on the acronyms. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. But I mean, so on a good day, stuff is happening, but I remember that I'm the one, and I'm gonna opt in, and that my loved ones are the point. And then on a not so good day, I realize I've wandered, but I realize that, and then I just come back.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
easier
And
said
there's no
than done.
crime. That's what's so important is that like this isn't the right way to be. It's not the right way to be. The village principles are not the right way to be.
Yeah.
They feel great. Do you want to feel great? There's a lot of people who I've been thinking about this for a minute here, where you know when you see videos from like 2000 and you're like, wow, everyone looks so happy. Why are you all so happy? Suspicious. And I think like the 90s had that pop psychology movement, and it was like, oh God, yeah, everyone just be happy all the time. Like what? So we kind of have an element of derision toward happiness and fun and pleasure and play, where it's like, oh yeah, the not important things or the things that hedonists seek or the things, whereas there used to be kind of like a, how do you have the most fun with life? How do you play? How do you, and now it's like, where can I be miserable in peace? Fucking, like, leave me in peace to be miserable. And that seems to be like the greatest aspiration of American culture at this time. And I'm watching that and I'm like, oh, like that's so in me. Like, where can I just be miserable in peace? Like, leave me alone, everyone. This is upsetting. It's universally upsetting. So there's a lot of subversion and a lot of courage in having fun,
Mhm. Mhm.
in letting myself experience bliss and joy while the world seems to be burning, while I have notifications on my phone about how the world is burning anytime I want to look for that.
Right,
Literally anytime.
right.
Um, I was gonna say something else, but no,
Well,
totally.
I mean, I actually had some curiosity around that too. In my experience of working with you, we're talking about our personal lives quite a bit, but there's been some times where the conversation just kind of went a little more meta. And I'm kind of curious, not to put a fine point on it, but kind of like, what do you see going on in the world? Um, do you think of your work as like imagining a better world or something like that, or is it more just like, well, this is how I live with my life, I work with the people that I know? I mean, I would be suspicious of any kind of how do we scale this kind of thing, because but I'm yeah, I'm just curious, because again, I feel like, and I think that I hear this a lot from others, who are on these calls with you, is this sense of, hey, Hannah, what you just said makes so much sense. And I've never heard anyone say that before. Like, so there's this simultaneous like feeling of, like you say, this feeling of coming home to something that like I've always wanted, and yet there's this awareness that like maybe if I adopt this, I don't know if anyone else I know is going to agree with it, or it, like there's this funny thing, and yet it strikes me that this is the kind of courage we need right now, because as you say, it's not hard to access evidence that the world is burning. And, not to say that it isn't burning, or to put that aside, but there's something that's really, really still available in this moment to each one of us that, you know, I mean, it might mean breaking some taboos. But if we can do that, then we really have, I think there's a lot more freedom to each one of us. Oh, look, the Zoom gave it the thumbs up.
Uh, well, yeah, so that's the thing with the village principles or with principles of right relationship is they let us feel so good. And I think that that is a reason why a lot of people don't use them because we have this inherent like I don't deserve to feel that good.
Mm,
And and if we were to put them up as like rightness of being, then they would become another thing to rebel against.
mhm, mhm.
And my favorite thing, speaking to what you just said, my favorite thing anyone's ever said about my work is when you speak, it's like, aha. And then it's like, well, duh. And that's my favorite way anyone's ever put it. I'm like, wow, that's so good. And yes, there's so much that's obvious and not at all obvious.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, how come Newton had to get hit in the head with an apple to see that gravity was happening? It is happening all over, right? Like, how do fish see the water they're swimming in? How do we acknowledge the air that we're breathing? The things that are most innate, we take for granted because they never, ever fail us. And when they never fail us, we are never invited to examine them deeply.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's another privilege of having my life wiped away. Like people get, I had to see all the lies. Like, oh, your parents will always be there for you. Well, factually, no. That is just simply not true of anyone's parents.
Mhm. Mhm.
And truly, there is nothing that can keep a human being in my life, even if they want to be there.
Right. So there's a real wake up that has to happen. And yeah. Um, I'm noticing I'm not sure where where else I want to go. Like this feels like I there's the podcaster voice like trying to make sure we've covered all the bases and that people are getting it. And I don't know if people are getting it or not, but I feel like just the tone here is different. And I think that's one of the things I noticed in the beginning. Maybe that would be actually good. I open my mouth and I stumble on something. So maybe we can finish with this, but we've talked about muscle tone a little bit. And another phrase you use, and what I like about it is, we use words, but as someone who works a lot with the body, um, I'm always looking for how can we use words to point back to the body, point back to things that actually we can't put into words. Um, and so there's one phrase you have that I also think is a very good, like let's say I'm in a crazy, complicated situation and it feels like a double bind. What do I do? And it's like I don't have time to figure this all out. Something I might pull out of uh, conversations with you is this phrase that what is the tone of love?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that this kind of answers your question about scaling or about, my vision for the world. Like, I don't really have a vision for the world. What I have is truth that's so compelling it catches on. So I don't need to concern myself with scaling it. And oftentimes I write about something and then I see other people writing about it and I'm like, mine. And then I'm like, it's not yours. It's not yours. Even if those are my words that they're trying to use, like the information has never been mine. It simply is the truth. And the way I say it is not the truth, right? The way anyone says it cannot be the truth. It's going to always be equal parts truth and falsehood. So I can speak to the truth in words that are equally true and false, and anyone who is attuned to the truth can hear the truth in the words that I choose.
Hmm.
And anyone who's attuned to the falsehood can find where I am wrong totally correctly. But what I want to build is something that we can invest our attention in. And that tone of love is something we can invest our attention in. I always can attend to my posture, feel gravity, feel the earth beneath my feet. I can always improve my own experience just by improving my posture. I can always improve my experience by tuning my pacing. And I can always improve my experience by finding something playful, right? And it's like maybe my playful thing is to bitch about this person in my head. That could be like a totally playful action that I take in a moment that makes me feel better. It makes me be playing, right? So there's never a right thing to do. There's never, but the real mind virus is that we can stop things. The idea that we can stop things, that we can prevent things, that we can work against things, we never ever can. We can only do something else. We can't stop doing anything. We have to do something positively, actually in reality, do something else. So what I'm trying to present is like, what can we invest in? What's always present that we can invest in, such that we can drop that resistance to tyranny and be invested. And I'm simply so busy being invested in this thing that I don't have time to say yes or no to the tyranny because I have something that is consuming my attention.
Yeah, and it's compelling and it's always there, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think of, so I said before that I think what you're up to is kind of a missing link, at least it has been for me and some of the things I'm trying to put together. Um, so posture is like I can already hear, or I want to invite people listening to hear in the word posture, we're not just talking about physical position. we're we're talking about, the orientation of attention, the sense of intention. Maybe this person is being terrible in this moment, but I actually know that I love this person. So how can I separate the I love this person from the terrible, and then work towards, this tone of love. So just to give you a little soundbite from Feldenkrais. So he would describe posture, and he would say good posture is not a position, right? He'd say it is the ability to move in any direction at any time without preparation or hesitation.
Ooh.
And then
Ugh.
if we take that out of just physical movement, I mean, it could mean I'm agile and I can, like dodge, bullets or something. But it's like, ooh, can I move to any position, psychologically, emotionally? And I mean, it's an ideal. We shouldn't assume that that's what we should, but that's the potential, that's the aspiration even.
That's what I love about Byron Katie's work and about truly being in the unknown, because a lot of people use Byron Katie's work and they're like, okay, so now I have to believe the thing that I really discovered is true. I have to believe the thing in the turnaround. And it's like, no, the point of the turnaround is to believe equally and not at all in every story so that I'm actually comfortable in not knowing.
Can you just say, for people who don't know what the turnaround is, like just give the quick definition?
Well, Byron Katie says, judge your neighbor, write it down, ask 4 questions, turn it around. So if I say Seth should do the dishes, then the turnaround is Seth shouldn't do the dishes, or I should do the dishes, right? So, and what we're looking for is not like, I should do the dishes. That's right. Yeah, I should do the dishes. We're looking for how equally true it is that Seth should do the dishes, that Seth shouldn't do the dishes, that I should do the dishes, that I shouldn't do the dishes. All of those are believable. We have evidence for all of them. So what is the point of believing in any one of them? And there might be a really good point, because that's the third question is, how do I react when I believe that thought?
Mhm.
So this is the reason to attach to a turnaround, is because it will help me act how I choose to act if I choose a certain belief. But when I acknowledge that they're all equally compelling, we have equal evidence for all of these beliefs that we might hold, that's when I'm really free. That's when I'm really free. And I'm in the unknown. And it's the best. It's just the best. I'm like, oh, like, what do you want? And someone says, I don't know. And I'm like, ah, amazing. Oh my gosh, that's the best. That's the best place you could be, is to not know.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's real sanity.
Mm. Well, I'm tempted to keep going, but I'm gonna look at the time and like call it. But let's do the traditional ending. Let people know where they can find you, and we can, put links and whatnot. But what's the coolest way for people to get to know you?
Ooh. Well, my Instagram is loving.university. There's a link in my bio there, which is probably the easiest way to say where everything is. I really recommend going with the boundary course first. Abundantly Boundaried, I used to call it the boundary course, and I can't stop calling it that somehow. But Abundantly Boundaried is a great one, especially for the timing. It's 90 minutes that you can read through. It's got 20 minutes of downloadable affirmations, and it reorients you to your yes. Whereas so much in this culture has oriented us to our no thank you, our not that. And all of that serves tyranny. That's the oppositionality that replaces our agency, because agency is really a threat to tyranny. So if we could get rebellion, tyranny is really durable to rebellion. But to exit that is to know what I am a yes to of the infinite offering, such that I don't need to make an answer to one specific thing or not. So abundantly boundaried frees us into this abundance and to the positive, which is like what exists, not what's pleasant. The positive reality that we do want to invest in. And it will give us boundaries and relational techniques to create situations we do want, such that we're too busy for situations we don't want. And then we don't even need to navigate, how do I say yes? How do I say no? How do I blah, blah, blah. Like, we're just too busy. We're too busy having an experience we do want to even have that question in our field. So I would start with abundantly boundaried if I were someone coming upon this work, because it's quick, it's juicy, it'll just revolutionize everything. And if you want live calls, that's what Love's Forest and Village Principles are for. The Village Principles Masterclass is not currently scheduled, but I am doing weekly teachings 4 times a week on Love's Forest on the ongoing Village Principles. And we're having a great time in there. And it is the beginning of a village. And if you want to experience a village that really functions this way, those Zoom calls are part of it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun in my experience for the last month or so. And this was awesome, Hannah. Really enjoyed talking to you. I can imagine doing this again because there's all these other things that I would have asked you about. Um, but let's call it a wrap from here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Seth. I really appreciate you having me on here.